Hello and welcome to episode 3 of our second season of Biology Explained with me, Mr. Hill, and Cinnamon. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at Key Area 3 for Unit 2 of the National 5 Biology course, which is all about fertilisation and reproduction. In particular, looking at the structure and function and features of gametes, as well as the process of fertilisation in both plants and animals. Now, if you're revising for your National 5, this will be a perfect video to help you along your way. But also if you're doing GCSE biology, or indeed you are working on any kind of 14 to 16 qualification, wherever you are in the world, this will be useful for you. If you do find it useful, please do share, like and subscribe, so you don't miss a future episode. It really helps the channel out if we get as many subscriptions as possible. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to go and launch into looking at the structure of gametes and how they work. So let's get started then on Key Area 3 of Unit 2, where we're looking at reproduction, particularly about fertilisation and the cells that are involved in this process. Now, in order for us to understand how fertilisation occurs and why it works, we need to first take a step back and have a look at how we describe the cells that are involved in relation to the number of chromosomes or copies of chromosomes that they have inside them, because that's very important when we're looking at the fertilisation process. So on the screen, you can see I've got two types of cells. On the left there, you can see I've got some generic cells. These could be white blood cells, for example, or cheek cells or skin cells. And on the right, I've got a sperm and an egg cell. Okay, you'll be familiar with these from lower down the school. These are involved in fertilization, and they are our sex cells. Now, for fertilization to be successful, you need to get a copy of the chromosomes from the sperm and a copy of chromosomes from the egg to give you a full suite of 23 pairs in the case of humans. Okay, so because you need 23 pairs, it's vital that the sperm and the egg only have one copy each of the chromosome, so 23 plus 23 to give you your 46. If the sperm or the egg had 46 chromosomes each, then the resulting zygote, which will then grow into the embryo, will have more than 46 chromosomes in total, which is not going to work. Okay, the cell needs 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, in order for it to start growing into an embryo and then into a fetus and so on and so forth. So when we're making sperm and egg cells, it's important that they only carry one copy of the chromosome, not two copies of chromosome. Okay, normal cells, of course, have two copies of each chromosome. They have 23 pairs. Okay, so 46 in total. There are terms that we use to describe these types of cells. Biology, of course, as I've said many times, is a subject of language, and it's important that you use the correct terminology when describing the different ideas, and those words usually have prefixes and suffixes that kind of mean what they mean already. Okay, so if you can understand what these terms are, then you're going to be halfway there to describing the processes of biology. So if we look back at our cells, then you can see on the left-hand side here, we have our normal bloody cells, and I'm going to change the colour of the pen slightly. Let's do these in red. We can see that these have 23 pairs of chromosomes each. Okay, so that's 46 in total. These are our body cells. Okay, and every cell in your body has 23 pairs of chromosomes, with the exception of the sperm and egg cells. Okay. Because they have two pairs of each, they have a pair, of each chromosome, so they have two copies of each chromosome. We call these diploid cells. Diploid meaning two, okay? So they have diploid cells, have two sets of chromosomes, 46 pairs of chromosomes. But in order for the zygote, which forms at fertilization, to also be diploid, the sperm and the egg have to have half the number of chromosomes, okay? So 23 instead of 46. Okay, so let's label that one up here. Let's do that in blue here. These have 23 chromosomes. Okay, not paired. Okay, do excuse my dog there. She's running around in the background. So 23 chromosomes, okay, not 23 pairs. These are our sex cells, not our body cells. And that has a special name. We call those gametes. You would have been familiar with this word, though, from lower down the school. And because they have only one set, a simple set of chromosomes, not a double set, we call that a haploid cell. Now, haploid, it means sort of simple, but if you can remember it maybe as half haploid, it's an easy way to remember it. So haploid cells are your gametes. They have 23 chromosomes only. And the purpose is, when these come together, you're going to have your full set of 46. Okay? So that's the difference between diploid and haploid, and we need to be using these words when we're describing our sperm cells, our egg cells, our gametes, as well as our normal somatic or body cells. I'm going to start by looking at the male gametes in animals, first of all. You'll be familiar with these when you've done reproduction lower down the school, but it's well worth us revising the words and the terms that we're going to be using and what points are relevant for the National 5 course. So remember, gametes then are sex cells. They are haploid cells. They have a single set of chromosomes, the point of which being that they will bring some of those the features of, in this case, the father, and they'll combine with the features from the mother and the egg to produce the new offspring, who has their own unique 23 pairs of chromosomes. So we need to first of all say where they're produced. Okay, so male gametes are produced here in the testes, which you remember from our last video is a gland that also produces hormones. Okay, so very important part of the body. It produces hormones that controls fertility, puberty, sexual development, and it's also where male gametes are made. Okay, in the testes. This, of course, is the male reproductive system, and the testes are found in the scrotum. Now, the sperm themselves are quite a unique-looking cell. You'll be familiar with what this looks like from previous lessons, I am sure. But we're going to recap what features they have and why they're useful for the sperm. So the first thing we need to talk about is the head of the sperm here. Okay, this is the nucleus, which of course contains 23 chromosomes, not 46. The sperm, of course, has a tail. The technical term for that is a flagellum. That helps it move. Of course, in order for the sperm to reach the egg, the sperm is ejaculated into the vagina, but it needs to move into the uterus, then up the oviduct to find the egg. So it has to travel quite far, and the sperm is a tiny cell, one of the smallest cells that humans make, that animals make, and it has to travel, a good few centimeters. We're talking about 10, 15 centimeters. So it needs to travel a long journey, an epic journey. It's going to need a flagellum to move, okay, and in order to provide the energy to move, it needs a battery of mitochondria. Okay, so it has just here sort of a bunch of mitochondria. I'm just going to put mito for short, mitochondria, which you remember from Unit 1 is the site of aerobic respiration. Okay, so respiration is occurring in the mitochondria battery here, and that's providing the energy to move the tail so that the sperm can then move to find the egg cell. Okay, so lots of mitochondria, the flagellum. The last thing here, and this is going slightly beyond National 5, but it will be amiss for us not to mention it here, is that there is this special body here, this kind of arch here, that contains enzymes that's going to help break down that jelly coat around the egg to reach the egg and then to deposit the nucleus into the egg. Okay, we call this the acrosome. Acrosome. It's not in the course for National 5, the word an acrosome, so don't worry. But it is a feature that is that the sperm has to do its job. So you can describe it. The acrosome contains enzymes. Again, these are biological molecules that break things down. They catalyze reactions. They contain enzymes that help break the jelly coat down. Okay, so for your National 5, you need to remember where these gametes are produced, how many chromosomes they've got, and some of their features that allow them to do their job properly. Next up, we're going to be looking at the female gamete. Okay, so the female gamete is the ova, okay, or the egg, but ovum. Ova is the plural, so ovum is the singular, but we call it an egg. But try and use the word ova or ovum in your answers. This is the female gamete. Again, it's haploid, so it only has one simple set of chromosomes that will then be joined with the sperm set to produce the diploid zygote that then the new organism is going to grow from. They are produced in the ovaries, okay, which are here in the female reproductive system. Okay, so ovaries. And again, thinking back to our last video, the ovary is a gland that also produces hormones that controls fertility, puberty, sexual development, and the menstrual cycle, as well as producing eggs. So a very important part of the body. The eggs are produced here. They're already kind of there at birth, actually, but they haven't kind of matured. And then when you hit puberty, the eggs mature on a monthly cycle and are released on a monthly basis in the anticipation of being fertilized by a sperm. Okay. Now, just like the sperm cell, you need to know some of the basic adaptations of the egg cell, the ova, in order for it to function properly. You will see that it is a very large cell. In fact, it is one of the largest cells that animals produces. Okay, and if I draw in comparison, a sperm is probably no more than that size. Okay, so it is an incredibly large cell. It has its nucleus. Okay. Again, has 23 chromosomes only. It's haploid. And then it has this kind of, if you like, this kind of buffer of sort of mini cells around it. Okay. For all intents and purposes, at National 5, we call this the jelly coat. And the purpose of this really is to kind of slow the sperm down so that only one sperm will fertilize the egg. Once the sperm does fertilize the egg, the jelly coat hardens up very quickly, and these cells provide a kind of barrier to stop any other sperm from entering. Because the problem is, if you have more than one sperm fertilize an egg, you will have more than the 46 chromosomes needed to produce an offspring, and so this no longer becomes viable. You can only have one sperm fertilize an egg. Okay, so the jelly coat is there to slow the sperm down, okay, and provides a barrier to prevent future fertilization from any other sperm. The sperm comes through, okay, and then the nucleus is deposited, and then the nucleus of both gametes fuse in the process of fertilization. So if I just sketch up here, okay, the sperm here, okay, and the egg, okay, they come together to produce a zygote. And I'm just going to draw like two nuclei there for short. Okay, they will fuse together to eventually form just that one nuclei. Okay, and that is our zygote. Okay, 23 chromosomes here, 23 chromosomes here, 46 chromosomes here, and that zygote is then viable, and it starts to divide into 2, 4, 8, 16, etc., and we call that the embryo. Okay, so that's the process then of fertilization in a nutshell, and we've looked at the structure and adaptations of the two animal gametes. Now we have to look at the process in plants. We've looked at how fertilization occurs in animals, mammals in particular, and the gametes are involved. We're now going to have a look at the same processes in flowering plants. Now, plants, they reproduce in a variety of different ways, one of which is sexually, just like animals do, and so we need to know the processes involved. In many ways, the concept is the same. Okay, you've got two gametes that need to fuse to produce a zygote, and they carry their haploid, and they carry half the set of chromosomes. But there are a few extra steps involved, and of course the names of the gametes are slightly different, so we need to make sure that we cover this fully as well. So think back to first, second year where you may have looked at a flower dissection, or you've looked at the different parts of a flower, and we're going to be using those terms again. So you can see on a diagram, we have our flower here. We're going to start with where the gametes are produced. So the male gametes, which are known as pollen grains, which are, I'm going to be dotting here in blue, are produced at the end of the stamen here, okay, in the anther. So we're going to label this up as the stamen. Okay, and this is where the pollen is produced. Okay, and the female gamete, which I'll just change color here. Let's do this one here. They are known as ovules here. Okay, so I've just highlighted a few there, and they are found in the ovary. Okay, so ovules found here. Okay, so you can see we're using the same sort of root language: ovary, ovules, ova, all related to the idea of egg. Okay, they are ovules. Okay, are found here, and we call that, of course, the whole thing, the style, and then the stigma, which is here. So you remember that from the first or second year. So the processes are very similar. The pollen is going to have to fertilize and fuse its nuclei with the ovules to produce a zygote. It does that first by the process of pollination. So a pollen is going to leave a flower, leave the stamen, and find itself attached to the top of the stigma. Now, plants, flowers, they do self-fertilize. Perhaps this pollen will just come in and self-fertilize like that. Okay. Of course, what a flower wants to do is to fertilize other plants so that there's variation in the new offspring. So you find often small insects will be attracted to flowers because of nectar that's found around here. And when they come in to get the nectar, they rub themselves against the stamen, collect some pollen, move on to the next flower, rub it onto a stigma on a new flower. Okay, so that cross-pollination pollination is what we want. But I mean, I've only got one diagram here, so you can imagine that the pollen is moving on to the stigma here. It does happen. The pollen is then on the stigma. We call that first step pollination. The pollen grain is then going to open up and it's going to produce a tube that's going to move down the stigma to the ovules here. That tube is built, and then the gamete itself is going to move through the tube where it then fuses with an ovary to produce a zygote. That's fertilization, and then it grows eventually into an embryo which forms the seed. Okay, the rest of the ovary here changes and it becomes a fruit or a casein or a nut, depending on the type of plant it is. Okay, but you don't need to worry too much about that process, although it is very interesting. You just need to recall that the pollen first pollinates the stigma, produces a pollen tube, it then moves down the tube to fertilize the ovule in the ovary in the middle of the flower. Okay, so if we just do that as a quick summary, just so you can see the language that we're using here. Okay, so the first step is that the pollen leaves the stamen. Okay, it's often picked up by pollinators who are attracted to the flower's nectar. Okay, it could also be the wind, of course, that blows it. And once it's been picked up, it will then land, hopefully, on the stigma of another flower, or indeed its own flower. So that's our next step, and that process is known as pollination. Okay, so pollen lands on a stigma. Okay, this is pollination. Okay, then a pollen tube grows from the pollen grain to the ovary, and the male gamete moves down it to fertilize the ovule. Okay, excuse the spelling there. And then finally we have the fertilization occurs, and a zygote is formed. Okay, this grows into an embryo that forms part of the seed. Okay, that seed is then dispersed. Okay, you remember that from first year, by the wind or by animals that eat the fruit. And then once the seed lands in soil, if there's enough water and it's warm enough and there's oxygen around, then it will germinate, and then a new plant grows from the seed, from the embryo that's in the seed. Okay, so this is one of the short key areas you'll be pleased to know in Unit 2. But you will still have a bank of questions about that. Every key area gets assessed in your National 5 biology, so you won't be able to avoid any topic, I'm afraid. On the screen, you can see that there are just 3 marks available, very short questions. Give this a go, and I'll see you very shortly with the answers. How well you've done. So question A, the diagram shows the human reproductive systems in females and males, and different parts are labelled. From the diagrams, identify one site of gamete production. So remember, gametes are produced in the glands that make up the reproductive systems. So you've got the testes here, and you've got the ovary here. So either of those will get you the mark. So an ovary or a testes. Okay, that's the singular for testes. If you did the plural, it's also fine. So there's your first question. Second of all, The diagram represents a process of fertilisation. You've got sperm and egg, and then you've got cell F. In the diagram, circulate one term in each box to show the chromosome complement for each cell. So it's using words chromosome and complements. So these are words that you need to know the meaning of. Okay, so the word slightly wordier question that it needs to be. It's just asked you to say if it's haploid or diploid. That's all. Okay. Now we know that a zygote has to be diploid because it's going to grow into a new offspring. In order for you to produce a diploid cell, the two cells that make it have to be haploid. Okay, because the two halves make a whole. So these are haploid. Finally, name cell F, which is produced. I've named it already. It is the zygote. Okay. Often students might call it the embryo. That's not true. The embryo forms from the zygote. So when it's 1, it's a zygote, and then it forms a ball of 2, and then 4, and then 8, okay, etc. That is when it becomes an embryo. But the first cell is the zygote. So make sure you remember that. Zygote just means to join. Okay, so it's when a sperm and egg have joined. So there you have it. Quite a short key area for the National 5 course here, but very important and sets us up nicely for our next episode where we'll be looking at variation. Once again, if you found it useful, please do subscribe and like. And I hope to see you very soon, as well as Cinnamon, for our next episode. Take care now. Bye-bye.